Okay, I want to discuss Benjamin Netanyahu's message to Tucker Carlson and those who are lying about Charlie Kirk's relationship with the state of Israel. I thought this is a grave step on the part of Benjamin Netanyahu. I thought that it didn't really make sense because, yes, you have these people on YouTube, just like here, but obviously with much bigger audiences and much more seasoned, saying some absolutely crazy things. But that doesn't mean that you have to respond. And there's different ways to respond based on who is saying the alleged thing. So I think the state of Israel has to ask, is it fundamentally a good thing, a good use of time, a good way to elevate certain voices and to have the prime minister of the state of Israel actually refute some of the lies coming from Tucker Carlson, Ian Carroll, and other people? My case would be no. I think that this is a bad thing. I think that the state of Israel should have other means of combating this. If someone from the government actually wanted to go on Tucker Carlson's show, that's assuming you're even going to give credence to it. Now, the argument against this, I think, is that Tucker Carlson's son works for JD Vance and that Tucker Carlson is an influential voice in the conservative movement. So, this isn't to say that there aren't merits as well for addressing this head on. I would just argue that overwhelmingly there are more negative results than positive results. So, as that's considered, I think that we now have a different reality, which is that um, when it comes to Tucker Carlson's show, Candace's show, now you have the sitting head of state. You have Benjamin Netanyahu, who has now engaged in these has engaged these conspiratorial people, and now you almost have to respond to what they're saying, and that's a bigger problem. So now when Max Blumenthal says crazy things on the Gray Zone or Ali Abu Nima from Electronic Intifada, instead of dismissing it, this has now entered the dialogue as mainstream discourse because the prime minister has responded to it. So it's a little bit complicated. I don't know exactly what went into that decision or why, but it's the fact on the ground and it has to be dealt with accordingly. So there are, just that's the reality. This is the situation. I think it's important to highlight that you have some absolutely obscene people that are being now mainstreamed, and that's one of the major challenges in the wake of Charlie Kirk's horrendous murder. Because instead of saying, okay, you have these crazy people like Nick Fuentes that are showing up and saying all sorts of things, but they're on the fringe, they're now trying to encroach into the mainstream. And when I touch on Nick Fuentes here, it's important to note that he is an extremely compelling voice, and that when you watch him, he is entertaining. He will say things that are nuts. As someone who disagrees with almost everything he says, I am entertained by by him when he speaks because he is a good, gifted orator. That's very dangerous. Candace Owens is able to command an immense audience, a huge audience. She's able to drive hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people to her videos within minutes. So these voices aren't going away. The question is, how are you dealing with some of these things? Are you examining the funding sources? I know Netanyahu alluded to Qatari money being behind or involved with either Candace or Tucker, but these voices have to be combated in an effective way. I'm not certain that the prime minister of the state of Israel doing it himself is that way. So that's a little bit alarming for me. And I think indicates a bigger problem when it comes to the American Israel relationship because you have all sorts of voices that are now being elevated. There's very little concern for historical fact. People have really no idea what's real, what's not real. All sorts of inventing, fictional stories out of whole cloth that are said to represent the fact on the ground, but it's just not true. Let's take, for example, the Hannibal directive that was used on October 7th, right? Israel had a long stand, which was then actually removed, but used on October 7th, in which rather than having Israeli soldiers taken into captivity and used as bargaining chips, that the IDF would actually eliminate all the terrorists, including that soldier who had been kidnapped. And in certain cases, it was actually used on October 7th. But this conspiratorial left wing and conspiratorial right wing take turns that into something that it isn't, saying that Israel was targeting its own citizens intentionally on October 7th. And that's why there was an issue. So you see how they manipulate these situations to really push a narrative that doesn't exist. It's extremely concerning because, unfortunately, as there are no gatekeepers now, the realm of acceptable dialogue just grows larger and larger. The Overton window is expanded, and you end up with all sorts of whack jobs saying things that are half truths at best and coming from a place that's not genuine. I'll go back to the Hannibal directive on October 7th. Did the IDF kill other members of the IDF? The answer is yes, but it has to be understood in the context of longstanding fears about IDF soldiers being taken captive and having hostages dragged into Gaza, into Hezbollah control in Lebanon. And without that context, the way in which these issues are raised is completely false. It's not that there's a shred of truth and therefore they're making a good point. It's completely false. These conspiracy theorists are out there saying that Israel is intentionally targeting its own soldiers or its own citizens. So you see how they take a little grain of truth and they turn this into a crazy, wide ranging conspiracy. And I'm not really sure where we go from here because now you have Charlie Kirk is dead. He was hosting so many of these conservative gatherings and making sure that there was a big tent, perhaps too big for some people. I myself had problems with Tucker Carlson speaking at Turning Point events. I think it's outrageous. But ultimately, it's up for Turning Point to make that decision. And it is what it is. It's the battle of ideas. I don't think that Tucker Carlson is a good faith actor when it comes to these issues. I don't think that Tucker Carlson has good intentions because he's intentionally omitting so many things that would easily disprove many of his arguments. And he's going right up to the line and actually showing a lack of courage. If he would have outright just said, listen, I have an issue with the Jews in America, I'd have a lot more respect for Tucker Carlson. At least Nick Fuentes says that. But when it comes to Tucker Carlson, he's hiding right up to that line, implying sort of dual loyalty and not actually being forthright with what he's implying with his rhetoric. So where does Turning Point go from here? I'm not really sure. But what's certain is that there are masses of people that are listening to the likes of Nick Fuentes, Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, and others. And some version of that combination has now been confronted head on by the prime minister of the state of Israel. So that's a change in the media landscape. I can't recall anything so direct, but this is something I think everyone has to be cognizant of because now what is said on these shows, so when Tucker Carlson directly calls Benjamin Netanyahu a liar and now Benjamin Netanyahu responds, there is more power that's being put in these podcasts and being put on these platforms than was previously there. So it's something to be cognizant of. It can't just be dismissed as some kooks speaking, which they are, but it can't be dismissed in such a way because the prime minister of the state of Israel has now responded and provided some sort of validity to these platforms. It's concerning. I'm not really sure how we got to this point, but hopefully the truth wins out. Even though Charlie might have had issues with Benjamin Netanyahu or with Israel in the last year or so with his life, I can't find a single Israeli that hasn't had some sort of issue with Benjamin Netanyahu or the IDF in the past year. So it's not really a big revelation. It's just that people that have very bad intentions and are deliberately spreading misinformation are furthering this kind of garbage in an effort to muddy the waters and to work on destroying a strong relationship between the Trump White House and the Israeli government. I'm not sure where exactly things go from here, but I'm highly concerned about the direction, the fact that you have crazy people like Max Blumenthal being taken seriously as journalists now and being cited by all sorts of podcasts that are now being legitimized by the prime minister. So there's a lot of issues here, a lot of things to unpack, and God willing, things turn in a more positive direction. But until then, I'm going to keep a close eye. Please keep tuning in, like, subscribe, share, so we can continue to grow the audience and have more discussions about these issues.